Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Images Group, welcome to the 8th edition of the Ultimate Conclave for the Indian Shopping Centre Industry, India Shopping Centre Forum 2015, a forum that explores the need to reinvent shopping centres for the consumer of today and the importance of moving beyond shopping to creating experiences. Over the course of the next 2 days, we shall have a galaxy of luminaries from shopping and retail share with us best global concepts and explore the implementation of world-class practices. There will be a plethora of insights to dwell on, to discuss, to debate, and hopefully arrive at conclusions which will help build a blueprint for success for the Indian shopping centre industry. Some of the key drivers of the future of the industry will be in how we answer the following questions. Can shopping alone be the cornerstone of the mall? And if this is no longer true, how then do we reinvent the model? How will non-shopping experiences and elements be the new age anchors for the mall? How are malls rearranging the jigsaw puzzle of getting the right experiential mix? India Shopping Centre Forum 2015 is organized by the Images Group, a trusted catalyst for the profitable growth of modern retail through knowledge platform leadership. With a strong portfolio of business publications covering all verticals of retail, the Images Group have served since 1992 to inform, advise, and inspire leaders and decision makers of the industry. The key retail verticals served by Images include fashion, textiles, real estate, technology, food service, food and grocery, retail support, beauty and wellness, and franchising. So welcome once again to India Shopping Centre Forum 2015. We begin with our knowledge series that will feature on creating experiential retail at its best. This knowledge session will run through a number of retail and retail-led development case studies, both recently built and on the drawing board retail projects, and a mixture of new build and retail repositioning work taken from across the world. They will illustrate the diversity and importance of an experiential and customer-centric approach to the 21st century retail environment. We are privileged to have Mr. Jeremy Salmon, Chairman, Asia Pacific Board, Broadway Malyan, a 4.5-decade-old global architecture, urbanism and design practice, take us through this session. Jeremy is a passionate retail design professional with over 20 years of sustained practice in creating authentic and exciting customer experiences. A trained architect, Jeremy leads a regional team of architects, interior designers, urbanists, landscape designers, and branding wayfinding designers across 3 studios in Asia Pacific. He has been involved in a number of award-winning benchmark projects in Southern Europe, including The Tower, 1 St. George Wharf, London, Man Island, UK, and Lisbon International Airport. Since moving to China in 2010, he has completed a vast range of commercial projects across the spectrum for premium clients, including Ivanhoe Cambridge, Nanfang, Tishman Spear, Capitaland, the Emotion Group, Macquarie, Carrefour, and the Powerlong Group. To share his experience and insights on creating experiential retail at its best, please put your hands together and welcome Mr. Jeremy Salmon.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here this morning to speak to you on the topic of experiential retail. There we go. Seem to have had a very full introduction. I thank you for that. The big question to start with, of course, is who am I? You'll see from your paperwork, your agenda, that I've got numerous titles: chairman of this region, director of this company. I think I'd like to start by saying at the heart of it, I'm a retail designer. And my, if you like, my pleasure today to, through that career is to focus on the customer experience and describing that through 20 years of practice across various places throughout the world. Okay. Experiential retail. Excuse me. What are the emergent tendencies and innovations in the architecture of retail, of experiential retail? I quite like this new term that's sort of coming through the conference paper. We looked at the sort of how to describe the thing we do, and in fact, many years ago, we all used to go shopping. Shopping was the activity, it's what we all enjoyed, or what most of us enjoyed, but suddenly shopping wasn't enough, and shopping became entertainment. Entertainment, again, it's sort of word, doesn't quite really describe the kind of whole industry, the act of consumption that kind of we're engaged in. And so I recall about 10 years ago, someone much cleverer than I at a sort of conference similar to this. They tried to coin and mix the words and coin a new phrase, and they came up with shopper entertainment. Again, it was kind of a very uncomfortable mix of words and didn't really capture for me the spirit of what we were doing. So we've got this sort of new phrase, experiential retail, which again, I quite like. It's certainly the experiential element of it. If you like, you'll see through my presentation, there's a slight question mark about the retail. I think because retail, in a way, again, doesn't quite describe the complete act of the experience we're describing and the act of consumption and being a consumer. But certainly it's to do with this aspect of the live, work, play equation. And where very much, I think, the act of retail design, experiential design, is focusing on the aspect of play. It's that part of the life of what our customers do that we need to focus into. It is effectively what we do with our free time. Now, we all work very hard. Some of us are fortunate in being vocationally driven, and we very much enjoy our work. A lot of us fight very hard through our work experience to open up this aspect of our life, which we call free time. And we, as an industry, and certainly myself as a designer, we're privileged in a way to kind of describe how people fulfill this important part of their life, how they fulfill their free time. And if you can enlarge the retail aspect a little bit more to think of it in those terms, I think it starts to allude to the role that we have within the kind of the urban landscape and within development. It's how people live. It is the story of the customer. And certainly in my experience of working through 20 years in different places, it's all about the story of the customer. It's about the evolution of the customer in different environments. If you like, it's a story of desire. It's a story of seduction. That very much sounds like a romantic fiction novel in a way, and I don't think that retail design and creating retail destinations is any dissimilar. We are there to woo, we are there to entice, we are there to create stories of emotion and excitement. Above all, we're there, I think, to make a connection with the people that we aspire to come in and for them to spend their free time in our venues. What makes it doubly interesting? You've got this new sort of dynamic across the world, mature economies, so-called mature economies, where, again, redefining the retail experience continually, trying to actually compete one to another, contrasting with the so-called emerging economies, where you have a new demographic that is growing and discovering effectively a new way to live. If you want to carry on the play with words, live is about live style. It's about discovering a lifestyle. Again, excuse me, my journey as a designer, it starts to touch through those mature emerging economy dynamics, and you start to experience all different types of customers across the world. I come from the UK. I started designing retail environments in the UK in a so-called mature economy. You saw then sort of an expansion as the economic union, the European Union started to gather momentum. You saw a growth in the middle class in Europe and a growth in their expectations, in their levels of supposed sophistication, in looking at how they spend their free time. And so you'll see through the projects that I'm going to show you later, that beginning of that demographic change and how those products evolved. We then saw an emergence of MENA, again, consummate with the Arab Spring. We all know about China, where I'm now spending a lot of my career and time, and with the PIMS as well. You see these emerging economies moving into and redefining what it is to be the retail environment. More recently, I've had the benefit and experience of working in South America and more recently in India. And again, it's the same sort of profile, but with its own very distinct characteristics. And we've got a big view and a big eye, of course, at the moment on Africa. It's the next place. It is effectively about people, is what I'm saying. They are wonderfully, wonderfully diverse, and yet they are wonderfully, wonderfully all the same. The diversity is driven by the context, and I think, again, as a designer, I always try to work, and I think if you can pitch, when you picture the projects I'm going to show you later, within this context, this effectively forms part of my brief. 3 simultaneous revolutions affecting all those people. Urbanization, communication, globalization. Urbanization, we're all in the world now of cities. And you can see some of the kind of phrases that come out of that. You can see some of the demographic charts that kind of occur. And apparently since certainly the last 5-6 years, more people have been living in cities than in rural areas. And I think there's a direct correlation between, certainly as a retail designer, the creation of retail environments and the creation of cities. They're very parallel. It is effectively a narrative design process. So we're engaged in cities, in all of those emerging economies, and it's the same dynamic about looking for a lifestyle, a quality of life, an enriched experience for the customer, for the end user, for people. In Brazil, Kuala Lumpur, these are just examples really, and you can see the sort of mega scale shift. I think the best retail environments are just great functioning cities in truth. Indonesia, perhaps more relevant to sort of obviously this forum, we're now engaged in a project in Bangalore, the Bhatia City project, where again it's a mixed use project, large scale, all of the elements in there, a significant element of retail, and it's about defining a lifestyle for a huge quantum of people in that context within a development project. For our role and our obligation is to define the character. We always talk about character areas. And again, that's a very relevant thing in terms of retail design, defining character areas, not just of the destination, but within the destination, distinct characters that touch upon the experience of going to that place, about making great places and a diversity of great places. Again, so you can see the blend within that of the retail component, the necessity for good urban design, placemaking, fantastic integration of landscape, and again, addressing what it is, the retail experience of working within that city area. And again, it's a retail problem, this. Globalization, the one world market. You saw that earlier picture of all the people. We are rapidly becoming one family. We're certainly invaded by a whole plethora of global brands now. And I think one of the more interesting, the third area for retail especially, the big challenges coming out of it are relating to technology. And I think this places such an emphasis on the quality of the experiential places we create and we design. We're in a connected world, information and global communications within the reach of all at minimal cost, the transportable internet, this device here, we've all got one. Curiously, I think there's a fascination with technology here, but I also think one of the interesting things about how this challenges the retail environment is that this offers me a very personalized butler service. And you start to refer to how retail environments within the real infrastructure can actually start to accommodate that real customer service aspect. You start to offer direct challenges and complementary to this technology. Certainly when you ally it to the big data ideas that are coming through and the liberation of information. So we're all familiar with the online shopping, the challenges of the mobile devices, big data, and the opportunities it brings for this kind of personalized service. I don't know whether this is actually a utopia or a dystopia, in a sense. And that's one of the few big challenges for all of us, is that as you walk through an environment, it gives you personalized adverts and servicing. Certainly, within the rise of technology, there's a way to make very real experiences, and should we say, less desirable experiences. This is actually nothing more than 2 walls of pictures where you scan. And I'm not sure, really, when you look at the rise of technology and the online threat, that all of it is such a threat when you contrast with some of the experiences that we can create within a real retail environment. So then retail. How do these tendencies affect retail? Why go to a shopping centre? I think the answer, the answer is complicated, but in a way it comes under one very clear strapline. We go to have a great time. Experiential retail is having a great time. And really, it ought to be really having a great time. So if you like, I've got a sort of series of topics and themes now to run through. And I'm going to run through them in the background of projects that I've been involved in some form. I think it's a very personal story, if you like, in that context. And you'll see a lot of the topics I ride through, they'll be appearing in a lot of the projects and they'll be mixed up. But if we could start really be behind the idea that great food equals destination. The idea of the extended dining opportunities, the extension beyond retail into kind of the diversified leisure activities equals extended dwell. And I subscribe very much to the thesis that the first challenge is to get the customers on site, is to generate the footfall within your territory. And so the expansion of food court, the diversity from food court, fast food, coffee, cake, through to fine dining, the whole gamut that allows you to expand from breakfast, lunch, dinner lunch, through to evening, you're extending the kind of the commercial window of opportunity within your shopping centre. So the first example, again, it touches on that beginning in Europe through that first wave of growth. Forum Coimbra was an award-winning project for us at the ICSC a number of years ago. It's a regional destination mall. Forum Coimbra is actually, as you see, Portugal, very sort of vertical sort of country. It's in the middle. This doesn't quite work. It's in the middle there between the two major cities. It's the third city of Portugal, effectively. The site itself sits on a hill. You can just see that. That's Coimbra. And opposite Coimbra, on the other side of the riverbank, is this sort of hill. So again, a very prominent position to create this destination, certainly within the context of the city. Currently occupied, or was then occupied, by a factory. So a great site occupied by a disastrous project, but of its time and of its making, and certainly the aspect of the city looking back. You know, you can almost think of this as a theatre context. Your audience sitting in the city, wondering what to do with their free time. They're looking across the window, out the window from their office, and they're seeing this as opposed to some really fantastic destination. So our task was to generate a regional scale mall. It had about 70,000 square meters of GLA, which meant in the context it had all of the kind of big ingredients from a retail destination. I'll focus on the food aspect a little bit later, just to take you quickly through the project. It had a number of levels of basement. If you like, to the north of the drawing, on the left-hand side, it's cut into the hill, and on the bottom, this is very important, on the bottom, the building exposes itself to the river and that window from the city. So if you go to the first floor plan, you can see the diversified characters of retail, the kind of the day-to-day retailing of the hypermarket, the world of toilet paper, shampoo, and lettuce is somehow concealed away from the higher-end fashion environments. That's an important character, but it's sort of kept away and distinct. And as you come up the scheme, you start to see the higher-end fashion and the anchors and multiples come up, again anchored at the back by the influx of parking. But then ultimately, on the second floor, in the blue, you see this sort of food destination, this food leisure destination. And if you look at the design, you can see very carefully it's put to the window side of the, excuse me a second. You can juggle these. Yeah. It's put to the riverside. It forms big open windows, so it has both views across the view, but more importantly, it opens up and the river environment flows in, and it can be seen from the town context, so with it capturing its audience. And it allows also a diversity of food, so you've got elements of internal food, fast food, and on the periphery you can put in fine dining. You can create that distinct contrast. We went through the process of defining the architecture, the materials, all very contextual, all very enticing, its embodiment with the landscape elements. And so finally, the design ended up with the destination tower marker seen from the other side of the river, and effectively this food court, this huge window, the food destination, which both had the restaurant elements and the opening into the food court. This was the big attractor. You take the section through it again, this is the sort of the mall area, the vertical gallery, the food court here, the big window and the terrace on either side of the restaurants. You can see how it's all structured about creating that piece of set theatre. Within the context of the whole development, at that scale, you need to start to create sort of decorative characterizations. This is, again, an important part of the experiential aspect of the retail. And we saw in Europe at this time a real heightening and emphasis on creating yet more and more decorative interiors to kind of differentiate this mall from a shopping centre that was being built perhaps 2 or 3, an hour perhaps away. So we ended up with a thematicization of the spaces, so the spaces take on characters, water, fire and earth, and the malls themselves. And to focus on the food aspect, it was the fire and wind aspect that caught our imagination. And we started to develop that theme throughout the detailed level of the design and informed by patterns. And really as a designer, when you're looking for this experience, the customer experience, you've got to somehow engage with it yourself. You've got to be excited by it yourself. And I don't think that's characteristic of just a designer. I think everybody within the development team, everyone extended within the management team, they've got to be excited by this idea, this kind of vision for the project. And it begins by looking at images and playing with words, and trying to define those characters and bringing them into a meaningful way into the spaces of the shopping centre. So we were fortunate, we had an enlightened client that benefited us with a fee sufficient to start playing with models and images and really discover and find out what that meant. As you can see, really kind of getting under the skin and trying to define that experience. Sketches, all of the public spaces that we can get into. Really, yes, to form the framework for the brands and tenants to come into, but also to add something else to the destination itself, to the cohesive experience of that shopping centre. Laying them then in detail into the areas, seeing how that then manifested from sketch, transitioned through to the reality. How then at the bottom, this is now the bigger mall area, the big gallery area. This is at the bottom, and the food court we'll look at later at the top. So you can see how we're creating a connection between those characters, but they're still of their own and somehow separate. Into the bigger spaces, working through. So finally, you see the layering of that character into the space as it starts to grow and enlarge, and you come up to the upper elements in the food court area. Again, if we zoom in on the food court, the river at the bottom, the opening, the big window opening. This almost kind of, we'll come on to indoors, outdoors later, but again, you see the outdoors becomes the indoors. You've got the fast food elements around the centre and the fine dining on the periphery. And this cohesive food destination is what really anchored the top of the project. Again, dealing with the sort of way you transition in sketches and the way that the design of the space itself, the decorative content supports the characterization. You know, even to the facades of the food units themselves, you can see the landlord developer taking more and more ownership of the identity of the surfaces of the project. Up to the food court area, you can see, again, big spaces, but concern about the reduction of scale and bringing elements in, so the scale of the space. So when you're sitting down at your table, you feel somehow comfortable. You're not exposed within a large area. And there we go. The old culmination of many years' work to provide this, both something that functioned by day and then functioned as the evening came in as well. Okay. And again, it's that sort of standing across from the river looking at this destination. How does it work out? So the beacon tower and that kind of warmth coming out from the glow of the food destination. Okay, so if you like, this is the live work, and this is we wanted to be the play on either side of the river. Okay, there's the view from the town looking back. That's where I'm going to spend my free time. Another quick example, really, of this food destination. This is a project where we've been brought in to do an insertion into something that was being built, new build project, but not completely authored by us, just to give a heart to the centre of the scheme. And it was almost as if this is ground first and roof plan. The scheme needed a heart. The development ran in a U-shape around, and we focused on this idea of a landscape intervention to create the food anchor. The character, the experience was a landscape experience, an outdoor experience, but a food-related anchoring experience. Okay. Where across that space we can start to create experiences, you know, crossing the bridge across. The bridge is just, it's kind of functional. Yeah, it does something important, but it has a character. It lends something to the experience of being in that space. And you can start to play really rich games with, you know, the idea of expression of wood as a material to be used and wood actually as a natural thing. You can play those juxtapositions, and it's that layering of richness into the space, I think, which really adds and builds the experience from a customer's perspective. Okay? As well as creating these lovely spaces that sort of in terraces seek back and they look at the garden space. It's just a great place to be. I think that's the common theme behind all of the work, is you've just got to create that great place to be. Landscape-driven environment. Another example of this is quite a common theme of the work, where you've got an existing shopping asset. This is a project in Chile. You can tell immediately that this is an older 25-year-old shopping mall, and at the time it was doing everything right, and it's not doing many things right now because the customers kind of moved on in their expectations. So this idea of coming back and repositioning elements and finding a new heart to the project. So our project was really a smaller intervention to come into an existing space here, an internal space, and expand into a roof space. And again, we kind of came with this idea of the food destination. So the early sketches, it's trying to treat the space as one homogeneous space. This is the indoor environment, this is the external environment. You can tell directly a contrast in the language, much more organic, curvilinear. It's a place to relax in. getting away from the rigor of the grid of the rest of the shopping centre and the task of shopping. This was a place to escape to. Effectively, again, the destination. And the rigor of that then in the detailed drawings, you see the common treatment of the floor surfaces, the introduction of landscaping inside and outside the building. Yes, functionality, it allowed everything to function 24/7. If it rained, you didn't start to lose your food offer. Didn't rain there that very often, to be honest, but it created this cohesive environment. And again, the task of the designer is to try to describe that experience, to kind of find that experiential moment about what it is to be on the roof of a large building, but to somehow be lost in nature as well. And trying to define that both from the facade, the tenancy, the commercial engagement of those tenants with that space, and how that needs to be just differentiated and interesting. So somehow, again, the landlord's taking control of the whole environment. So both the landscape came into the interior food court area, and the external area functioned and became the heart of the development. The next example, really, I'm trying to give you a contrast, really. The bigger projects, what historically the last one certainly was out-of-town project, to something more urban. This is the similar set of ideas applied to a very constrained development. It is a city block. There's no opportunity for major public space or opening of the building in there. And you can tell by the image, it's sort of a city that's sort of pretty tired, actually. And the shopping experience as well. The consumers moved on. They're not really content with this sort of blind box with just kind of access on one corner and prioritizing, and then everything internal and no daylight. And as you come up the building, the food experience is one of sitting inside a windowed environment with no engagement with the outside. So for us to kind of start to destinate and reposition this, the experience was all about the food. It made total sense to start to open up the upper levels. So you start to create a food court area that opened up and engaged with external terraces. At the lower levels, bring some food uses in, part of the experience of food, bringing it down into the building. And at the top, to bring in this open public space of the food court. And you start to see then how that creates a place, how that starts to become something incredibly exciting, experiential for the user in the city. This is currently on site and perhaps finishing in about 9-10 months' time. The other idea to bring is really one about storytelling. People like to talk about it in terms of circulation, but I think storytelling and the idea of space and circulation is all about the same thing, to create the destination. So for me, it's about the careful unfolding of a journey. We talked about the sort of the controlling and sort of somehow defining the desire of the customer experience. It's about enticing them to move through spaces. And if you like, the narrative of public realm is that it's been disappearing over the years. Rome used to look like this with major public space. Barcelona suddenly lost some of it, and in the States it kind of went to the grid completely. So there's a kind of an international aspect, and there's a pejorative is that this is just a European idea. But my experience of being in China, this is a water town. It's about an hour's drive from Shanghai. If you start to map out the public space, you see exactly that same kind of tightening and opening of experience, spatial experience, that defines destinations and characters within a small town. Yeah, and again, lovely places. And it's that kind of richness that you find in these kind of historic towns, again, that's so beneficial when you bring it into this storytelling aspect of designing shopping centres. Here's an attempt. This isn't one of my projects, but it's a really nice attempt to do this in Beijing. It's a Salitern project. Again, you see that idea of closing, expansing, and creation of public space. So a quick example. This is a shopping centre that's probably the first ever shopping centre, proper shopping centre in Madrid in Spain. It's called La Vaguada. It was built again about 20 years ago. You can tell by the way it's laid out that really it's not focused terribly much on this idea of storytelling. Okay, it's got all the ingredients, the big food, the big department store, coming out the basement parking here and here and here. It's all very linear. So my story, especially in this aspect, is my story begins. I woke up, had a lovely day, I went sort of shopping, I got there, and then I had to retell the story to myself. It doesn't unfold. It doesn't layer on richness of experience. You have to kind of go back on yourself. On top of that, you can tell as well, if you go to the floor above, it's got no daylight. And then the top roof level, it's just kind of dysfunctional, dislocated leisure elements. So it's very simple for us to kind of reappraise that. And again, people will call this about circulation. It's actually, for me, about storytelling. It's focused on the customer experience of being able to walk around an environment and for their story to continually be new and unfold. And then, of course, bringing in above that, bringing that connection to nature and the daylighting coming through on the next level. And we were lucky to kind of put on top of it a cohesive leisure destination. This is the idea of the food destination, but not just food, it's that extended leisure activity of the cinema, yes, the children's leisure, yes, and all those aspects of bowling and karting and stuff that now reinforce the leisure destination. Again, indoor dining, outdoor dining. And all that adds up to provide, again, this opportunity for a very interesting and new facade on the front of the scheme that looks across a park and opens up to the city. So again, it's about the facade, and we'll look at some more facades later, about that enticement, about bringing the excitement out of the project and into the environment. Indoor-outdoor, I've mentioned it already, it's one of those common themes, connectivity to nature. People love outdoor spaces. I think people love historic centres, whole city centres, and if your shopping environment starts to reflect that, you've already built in a very amenable experience. This is a factory outlet scheme we've done in the Netherlands. It's just very quickly to say, you know, the problem with indoor-outdoor is that sometimes it rains, especially in the Netherlands. So it's the ability to deal with that in an experiential way so that the canopying is continuous. So people get their outdoor experience, but this doesn't close when it rains. It's kind of got covered walkways. It's got full accessibility. And they help to define great public space as well. Another example, again, food-related. There's a shopping centre in Spain. Again, just to focus on one small aspect, this is the upper floor of that shopping centre. It's the retail, it's the food destination again, quite small, with some cinemas, some leisure and some food offer around the front. But actually, we conditioned the MAO. This is the glass line, and this is the external area. So that's that commonality of treatment of indoor and outdoor. So that both the outdoors comes into the MAO, and the MAO goes out into nature. Part of my life, I think this is about knowing your customer, identifying who your customer is. They need to feel that whatever you've created for them is just a natural and intuitive extension of their life. They're not forced to go there. They just naturally find themselves there in their free time. And that's about being culturally connected and building it into. So it comes back to this being very specific about the understanding of location. Now, this is a project that we've authored in Colombia, in Cali. If you like, the context for this is the social activity, cultural activity here is bullfighting. I mean, not necessarily all the time bullfighting, but everything associated with that in terms of the culture of living in this town. The town is over here and more towards over here. So you can see the natural layout of the shopping centre. It's all about providing that route and access and that flow to and from the cultural destination. But it's also about providing a space in between that becomes a new commercial destination, a new place that functions even when the fighting isn't going on, effectively. So you can see, again, there's not a lot of scope for sort of circulating horizontally, so we've put in a lot of multiple layers, so the circulation is vertical coming through. But it's the definition of that space, and again, building the leisure and the food offer around there. So that becomes the sort of social heart of the scheme. And as you come up the scheme, you can see that layers back in a terraced way, ultimately. Hang on a minute. No, that doesn't look like good news. Bear with me a moment. Okay, this was inevitable, the technology breakdown. So what you find is that this space now expands and provides just, again, this fantastic positioning place between the bullring, the architecture of the bullring, and this restaurant space. So everything is looking at that direction now. There we go, the retreated space. Okay. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it, how people, when they put their screensavers on, they always show lovely places to be. It tells you everything about what customers want. They just want to go to places which are natural and beautiful. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if this works now. Again, so this space starts to kind of be unfolded and created between the bullring and the town, creating these new spaces. And again, that space comes up the scheme again. So it's a sort of a layered vertical window where you get this food court area here. The internal area is very dynamic. It's like a natural canyon. Again, it's got that aspect of all covered spaces, so it functions throughout the year. It's doing everything right in terms of forming the appropriate frame for the brands to come in and fill, give their support their particular experiential add to the customer offer. And then just creating that fantastic space. You know, that space that, okay, is between the bullring and the shopping. There's that opportunity for that extended food destination, that leisure destination. Again, a kind of a worked example of that within the context of Europe, in Portugal, Faro, where it has an important airport and a important tourist destination. This is the existing town. You can read everything about the way people live there just by looking at the way they've laid their town out historically, about the way it is architecturally as well. And again, initially we sort of had trouble with the idea that we were going to do something quite so sort of in a traditional way, but again, it works perfectly in this environment. And I think ultimately the challenge of the designer is to make whatever experience you make, you've got to make it an authentic experience, certainly in the way it's sensation. And I think we've achieved it with this one, where it's got both the hypermarket, all of the kind of, again, the lettuce, toilet paper, shampoo aspects of their lifestyle is there, complemented with the outdoor space. So again, if you look at the plan, the hypermarket hidden, the internal mall, there's actually a bypass, so you do have a circuit through there. You've got the internal environment, it functions 24/7. And then you've got the external plaza environment, which again, it's really where the life of the thing starts to take off. This is where you get that added experiential elements coming in, even in the parking. You know, this is all under the box of the hypermarket, the opportunity to open that up and create the landscape drop and the waterfall coming in. Within the environment of a hot climate, absolutely essential to hear the noise of the water, the smell of the water as you're coming to your shopping experience. And to create just this beautiful place that sort of functions in all the commercial terms, the shops work, the circulation it works. It has these architectural kind of iconic elements, both inside and outside the scheme, has a bit of fun. I mean, huge opportunity for kind of children to enjoy themselves, children of all ages, children of my age and children of your age, to come in and actually be entertained by this environment. You know, again, it's that kind of covered environment but functions day and night. And it just creates a great place. And when it's too hot, people disappear into the shade, and when the sun goes down, it becomes the center of their lives. It's where they go to entertain themselves and their families. Underpinning a lot of this is this appreciation of landscape and the contribution it makes. So green cities, green malls, and nature into the mall. We always start with this, imagine this irresistible place. Try and imagine this fantastic place. It's better than anywhere else that anyone can ever visit. And that's the starting point for every project, really. So in Hershey, on the eastern coast of China, in Nanjing, on the riverside. Again, it's picking up on the cultural context of what that is. Working out what it will be to make a sense of place real for those customers in that location. It was a very difficult site for us in retail. You can tell, very linear. You don't get the opportunity to create that circulatory journey. So really the shopping centre became more of a boutique experience. It kind of became the centre of a neighbourhood. The circulation kind of went out the bounds of the shopping centre, and it primarily engaged with the river environment. You know, linear was a problem, but actually linear was the opportunity because it opened up this river frontage. And the shopping opportunity, the experience, was one of shopping along the riverside. So the way that the kind of planning worked, it was all about getting, yes, intensity of the mall, double-sided retailing, but again, bringing people in and out from that and engaging them with the river and at specific public spaces at the end of the scheme. Entertainment, leisure-based retail experience to create that flux point in the community. Yeah? It was actually sat alongside some very big mainstream shopping centres that had all of the generic kind of retailers in there that were doing all the kind of normal categories. And we wanted to create that counterpoint, that experiential counterpoint, where people would come and spend time there. Landscape-driven. And again, focusing on those types of the spaces and describing through the same visual work. It was a mixed-use scheme. It had a hotel aspect to it, a retail aspect to it, an office aspect to it, but primarily the dynamic was, yes, it was this way, but it's also engaging with the river. Trying to deal with the architecture and give it character of place. The stones are a very important element of kind of the Hershey Riverside environment, bringing those into the architecture, building in a bit of fun. So along the riverside, it seemed appropriate to think about some kind of silos for some reason. They had faces, and that was funny. And that kind of built into the richness of the experience. It kind of layered in that richness. And the architectural expressing the entrances with these sort of portico elements. Just to create this kind of playful and entertaining character to the building itself. But as I say, primarily, this was about the river. The commercial functionality, if you go basement, this was all open to the river, but kind of in the ground this side. It's that tightness and experience of the double-side retail here, but opening it up at points and bringing it out and engaging fully across the river with the bridges. So again, the section had that tightness, and then it had that openness. And the whole character began a kind of a story and narrative, but not so necessarily in a horizontal way, but in a more of a complex way, engaging with the neighborhood. But landscape-driven. So an awful lot of time and energy went into deciding the experience of this environment in complementary and functioning with the experience internally with the environment of the shopping center. This had to become the center of the neighborhood. So all the energy kind of goes into the landscape character, and the landscape contributes to the experience then. About how to get the food uses into that environment and up to the river, and how to kind of do the work in a very detailed way. Okay. Even down to the sort of fisherman's steps and the layering into the landscape. And again, as a designer, this is just to run you through all the various aspects about how you start to build that experiential environment. It's about the hard landscaping. It's about contrasting that with the timber. It's a riverside environment. So the idea of jetties and that idea of going out, experience of going out to the water and back to dry land was an important thing to reflect in the materials. Bringing some water within to the context of the building as well. The green landscaped aspects of it being done in a designed manner, so it talked about the linearity of the river. Bringing some art and some sculptural form, because there was another story, another narrative, which was about exploring art as you went in this linear direction. Suddenly the seating and all the streetscape needed to be art as well. And the lighting elements, especially in terms of when it comes to nighttime, and the soft plantings that support that. And what we found during the process is that the landscape was taking over, and the landscape then came over the building. It became the dominant feature in a very total way. So suddenly we had food and beverage offers up on the roof, and we were creating open-air restaurants on the roof. So the landscape treatment suddenly took over the building as well. It's again that extended food destination. The city side, and that's where the heart of the scheme opens up. That's the great place to be side. And again, contrasting the bigger schemes with more tighter urban schemes, it's always relevant to bring this landscape idea in. This is a project we're now on site with in Shanghai. Very important commercial street in Shanghai. This is what it looks like right now. But it's a fantastic site location. Obviously there's the commercial aspect of the street, fantastic street, with really top-end brands coming through. But what interested us was that, as well as this landscape dynamic. From the top end, from the roof of the scheme, we can look into this beautiful park, and it somehow connects two of the very few parks that are in Shanghai. So it had the kind of the commercial positioning, it had the focus on the customer and the high-end fashion and the food offer, but it also had this added element of the landscape destination. Very difficult, small building, but 5 floors. So again, how do you get the customers up to the top? And again, it's the landscape starts to help us in that process, because we built a double-story escalator through a green landscaped tube that got to a landscaped in green wall space that reverted itself and came out to the top and emerged in this garden. And the garden is where you went for the food destination. And the garden is where you sat there and you looked down the park and you looked along the commercial street. Again, it becomes that great place to be. A similar set of ideas, again, really, when you look to another scheme for a Carrefour. Carrefour, renowned for their sort of food and hypermarket product. Again, they are now deliberately diversifying, extending into experiential retail and adding on. So this was adding on to an existing project of theirs. And it's the same format of ideas about creating the open space, the integration of the landscape to create an event. So it's kind of an open air street event, covered and interesting, and the landscape comes in, and the landscape becomes the art, becomes the feature of the scheme. Even in the extended dining areas. It's a very sort of hot, arid place, so the landscape tends to be quite like this, as well as the green stuff that you'd expect. And sometimes, again, like the landscape takes over the whole branding and theme of the center. This is a center in Argentina, again for Carrefour, where the whole branding emphasis has taken over the colors of the natural landscape, the iconography that we're using in terms of the sort of the wayfinding signage. Again, building that cohesive experience from the natural world coming into my shopping experience. You see the color and the tone and the materiality, all being quite vibrant, but set in that kind of naturalistic context, bringing nature into the mall in every way. When you get to the kind of ultimate point of that, you sort of extend well beyond retail, and you get to this concept of what I call retail resorts. And if you think about the leisure destination, beyond food into extended leisure, you ultimately get to the bigger schemes which look at this type of element. This is a scheme, again, we're working on in the south of Spain. It is a historic touristic destination, but should we say it's had less of a profile in the last few years, so it's kind of regenerating itself, sitting between the mountains and the sea. This is the site here. So it sits between the mountains and the sea. It sits also between the airport and the major infrastructure. So it's a great place for a resort, retailer's resort destination. And it's a huge scheme. It's got a bit of everything. So it's got your, if you want to call it the village or the gallery, it's more of your retail element to the scheme, the retail park, and then the fun. So it's bolting all these elements together in what you would call a retail mixed-use destination. There you go, there's that journey from the mountains. The road comes right through the center of the scheme, so both by day and by night, it's creating that dynamism and activity. Yes, it's got all of the brands. They're giving great expression to invent themselves and reinvent themselves within the shopping element and into the open air element. It's got the event space. It's got the aquarium. It's got all these extended leisure uses, the wheel, the village shopping, all these different characters brought into the larger development. The village, very deliberate themed architecture, going towards the theme park. The landscape supporting that, the link spaces, gourmet worlds, the whole expression of characters you can bring into the larger scale that fit into this resort idea. Pop-up stores, definitely a concert area extended into the landscape. Okay. And then what we call the fun. This effectively is a theme park. It's a retail-led theme park with the leisure uses, cinema, food court, and then some key sort of leisure-based retailers bringing in their experience and bringing in their brands. Hamley's coming in with a sort of branded theme park for kids, again, kids of all ages, where you're using their brand collateral really to express an experience within a fun and leisure environment, a kind of an anchor effectively to the whole commercial development. Again, all brands that you start to recognize, and certainly kids would recognize coming into that context. And then more obvious kind of sports and leisure pursuits, the wave machine. Skiing now, skiing in shopping centers is becoming increasingly popular into that development. Okay. And again, it's being very careful with the way the circulation works. You could argue a very linear mall, but again, it's that expression of the linearity being an indoor and outdoor experience, engaging with the landscaping, so the kind of commercial facade extends all around the external perimeter as well. Again, more examples of that. You see this is a scheme in Portugal, again on the drawing board we're working on. It's the landscape space, it's that creates the themes, the resort idea, it's that engagement with the exterior, as well as the more conventional, you could argue, shopping mall. And again, doing this sort of work around the world for a different set of clients in Argentina, the indoor shopping experience, the outdoor shopping experience, the whole leisure resort aspect and feeling for the way it's dealt with. And that's about having fun with the decoration, with the shop front, creating a holiday kind of ambience, if you want, for better terms, about creating kind of outdoor spaces, but also engaging with the landscape. The landscape becomes very, very important to kind of give that overall cohesion. Branded environments, again, this idea of the branded environment being in our full immersion, and we looked at some of the earlier projects. This is another example here of a less landscape-driven project in a sense, La Spezia in Italy. The language comes out of the context. It's a project that's between the harbour and the mountains. Again, seems to be a lovely Italian town. And again, us looking at the kind of the dynamics of the narrative of the spaces that they work in, adjoining villages, and trying to bring that through. And this became the starting point for the design. When you start to map out the customer experience, this is the project here. You start to pull up on some key routes. Again, it's about the shopping centre having its own circulation, but engaging with the circulation, if you like, the cultural circulation of its context. So that journey through the shopping centre, part of that town journey, became kind of one of the drivers through the scheme. It started to drive certainly the principal circulation and the layout. You start to come towards the anchor space here again, with the food being the point of high point reflection looking across the city. But more interesting was the journey or the way the brand started to take over the project. So again, looking at the natural landscape and these shapes, started to develop a language, a graphic language that applied itself both to the development inside and outside. Looking at the landscape, but also looking at the townscape. About how these kind of started to become important key drivers in the characters, the experience of being outside looking at and being inside participating in this shopping experience. You start to see how it motivates and drives the kind of the language, suddenly a very geological approach to the buildings. Yeah, both the building itself forms part of the landscape now, and the parking external areas do as well. And even that landscape then goes through to the mall areas. It becomes part of the decorative content of the mall. There's a cohesiveness to the whole experience, which makes it stand out as a singular destination. It contrasts it from the rest of the world. Very early kind of renditions and renderings of what that might mean, looking at the different opportunities within the dynamic of the mall cross-section and how that would work commercially. Modelling it and elevating it to a graphic, a brand that started to then apply itself to the decorative surfaces. A layering of that brand, understanding what that is, putting meaning within the context of those colours that were relevant to the customer group. Manifesting it as a name, manifesting it as a logo, again, an aspect of that experience behind the kind of sophisticated retail destination. All the way down to the way that the toilets were manifest, or the wayfinding signage was designed, through to the T-shirts, through to the shopping bags. Again, we were kind of reasonably fortunate in terms of the transition, and we created an environment that still had that kind of context and that flavour, yet more excitement as it developed on. I put this one in to kind of reinforce the point of the toilets. The washrooms are such an important part of that experience. And as retail designers, we love doing washrooms. They're just great. That's where your customers spend an awful lot of time. And it's also one of the areas where, if you want a little bit more reserved about your kind of mall content and decoration, the toilet's where you can have an awful lot of fun. Again, it's the building sitting somehow in its landscape, but somehow separated from it and identifiable within that city. Shapes in the mall. You can't get to generic playful design ideas of shapes in the mall. This is a scheme in Suzhou. Again, about vertical space and about how something sort of higher up there that's more organic, how it kind of attracts people. It's a part of the experiential desire about pulling people through spaces, whether it's on the floorscape or floating areas that are above. You've always got that sacrosanct kind of sight lines for the tenancy. You've always got to protect those. So you've got these territories above and below where you can start to explore and exploit, and occasionally with pop-up shops and elements that again augment the mall and they lighten that experience, and they sort of all bring it together in this one cohesive, again, it feels like a great place to be. So you go from the earlier sort of renderings into the reality of those objects and spaces and hanging within the space and bringing people through. You can suddenly see a very different tactic here of highlighting the intensity of the brands and the tenants that come in and separating those out, both indoors and outdoors from the project. One more example, shapes in the mall. This is a scheme we've completed in Frankfurt. Again, huge sort of sculpture tree, a leaf, huge leaf, and a great big nut. And the nut becomes the place for a new sort of coffee shop experience, hanging within the conventional space. And it's playing with those kind of those allegories and those metaphors, which kind of I think enriches the space. This is, I don't know, this is a huge cheese grater that suddenly appeared in the mall. It's the way to make a bridge, but it became the way to do a ceiling. And it suddenly makes a moment in that customer experience above and beyond the branded moment of what the tenancies are doing. Finalizing, to finish with dynamic facades. You've seen a lot of dynamic facades through the work. But again, this idea of repositioning, this was a very tired project for ING in the south of Spain, where just through applying graphic treatments and lighting, the whole thing suddenly stood out within the town. It suddenly was a great place to be. A small punctual piece of work for Ivanhoe Cambridge in Changsha. This was a very limited intervention, a very limited budget. We managed to come up with a new brand and just doing something to the entrance, something enlivening and different that refreshed it from this sort of other tonality. A punch, if you like, a pop that kind of gave some experience, customer experience to the entrance. It somehow got them excited about going into the shopping centre. And then kind of extending that treatment. This is now very near completion in the north of Shanghai, Jinqiao, for an important developer. Again, it's that playing with layering and lighting and colour, giving opportunity, again, the expression of the brands and the tenancies. These are all opportunities to create lucrative vertical space. And now completed one in the Philippines. The tower itself is completed to here. The retail podium, this bit here, has been completed now for about 7 months. And again, that dynamic facade sitting within your city, that's just an experience you want to go and sample, you want to be part of that. It isn't just about the landlord, it's about the tenancies. We're very familiar now, sensational design of shops, pushing the brands, very familiar with the high-end brands, taking ownership of their facade, and increasing, you see, all the way down the brand scale, value retailers pushing their brand and pushing their designed experience from their customer. We do a lot of work for Primark, but Primark, I mean, effectively Primark, when you go in, it's like a huge jumble sale. That's actually part of the experience. It's part of the beauty of going to one of their places. And this, at the end of a Saturday, looks very different to what it looks in the photograph, of course. But that's a very big step up for a value retailer to create that kind of branded identity, encouraging and working for Forever 21 in a similar way, for Ripley. For smaller outlets, Faith Shoes approached us and tried to give that punch and lift, again, dealing with the tenancy side and into the food use. It's about creating a specific experience within the demise itself, food-related reuse, or even extended leisure, working for creating a kind of a customer experience for Virgin Active in terms of their work. And just to finish, really, this is a kind of, one of the interesting ones for me is a project for Vodafone. They wanted a mobile phone shop. And if you push beyond the boundaries of what a mobile phone shop should be, you get into this branded environment where there's a place here for DJs to play records and a place here for people to engage socially with a cafe. They're selling a lifestyle, they're not selling phones. In fact, actually, I'm very hard pushed in these photographs to find out where the phones are. It's a lifestyle environment for a very specific targeted age group where they can come down, they can listen to bands playing. They might well be charged to go into that environment. You talk about monetizing the experience. Okay. And again, a kind of cafe area and lifestyle and sort of extending into sort of food as well. So just to finish, I think it's a creative expression of ideas there. Obviously, it requires an understanding of architecture, landscape, branding, wayfinding, interior design, retail planning, lighting, acoustics, audio-visual, increasingly technology design. But the creativity, I would say, is not just the remit of the designer, and that's really the purpose to running through all these kind of ideas with you, is to extend this idea that the creativity is the whole team. The creative commercial visioning comes from the leadership, and that becomes the rallying point for the designers. So yes, you need great designers. You also need very, very creative and great and an innovative marketing team. You need a very innovative management team. There's no point bringing together the greatest shopping centre in the world if your tenants are then allowed to kind of wash their dishes on the mall. I mean, I've seen this. Innovative leasing. It shouldn't be, or leasing and legal, it shouldn't be just because the lawyer cannot describe it within a document that you can't let that creative and that mixture of space happen. Creative tenants and creative communities. So I think in a way, certainly from me as a designer's perspective, experiential retail. It's the best way I think we've got of summing it up at the moment, and maybe in a few months someone will come up with a better idea. But it's definitely the counterpoint. It's what makes the difference, and certainly differentiated. I think experiential retail is the counterpoint to the online threat. Differentiated is the counterpoint to the competition between shopping centre destinations. But ultimately, and just to finish, it comes back to that simple point of just make it really great. Thank you.